Okay. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I want to honor this really special hour we have together. So welcome to the One Health, One Planet Conference. My name is Tim Galarno, he, they. I'm from UC Santa Cruz and work for the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. I also help co-chair our UC Basic Needs initiative and efforts. And I'm really excited to host this session with some incredible presenters to explore some of the dimensions of student food insecurity and how we're responding holistically and approaching efforts to destigmatize and connect, uplift, and nourish students and build their success in higher education in California and beyond. We could advance the slide. When you're ready, Travis. Oh, one more back. It looks like it maybe had a delay there. So let's go to the previous slide. Ooh, there should be an introductory one in between those two. Not sure if you've got that on your slide decks.
It shows that it's on slide 2, but it still shows the first slide, which goes straight to slide 3.
Well, if you'd like me to give me sharing screen access, I can share it on my end and then stop share.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries. That's all right. I'll dive in and just, I'll wait. Do you give me that co-hosting? All right, there we go. Looks like we can do it now. I got rid of 30 top pieces in my browser, which is really good so that you're not seeing all that. Get into presentation mode. All right. So I just wanted to kick off to acknowledge the beginning of the conference, our opening speaker, Bill Dietz, and our subsequent speakers on COVID and the global reality. We had a concurrent agreement around the issues of political and social inequality that are contributors to food insecurity, and that level of power imbalance and destabilization is something that's reflected in larger forces of our food system and the political economy of the food system globally. Now we're kind of stepping out of that larger discussion into college food insecurity and college food security, and specifically in the United States. And our panelists will be speaking to that. And I think some of the key issues that we'll explore, I'll highlight and weave into my next and only slide before we bring our panelists and presenters in. And I'll introduce our panelists and presenters as they step in. You can see the links in the Whova app. So this is our overview for our session. We'll start with our Director of Student Mental Health and Wellbeing in the University of California, Office of the President, Jeannie Kim. And then we'll move to hear from Emily Cass, our Community Engagement Manager with the national nonprofit organization Swipe Out Hunger. And then with Shireen El Rafai, our coordinator of the Associated Student Food Bank at UC Santa Barbara, and one of our pod leads in our UC Basic Needs Village for our food access and distribution pod. And Damian Parr, our Research and Education Coordinator and Lecturer at UC Santa Cruz and the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. And through that, we'll explore diversity, equity, inclusion, projects and efforts nationally to project levels with Swipe Out Hunger, to student experiences and context of leadership, to education and transformative education experiential learning. And we'll open it up for a Q&A and conclude the session at the top of the hour at noon. And we want to encourage folks in the Whova app to ask questions during the sessions, and we'll be voting on those questions, and we'll have a curated Q&A based on the questions offered, and really excited for that. Let's get back into here. So what I just wanted to speak to in the context of food insecurity. So the USDA has a supplemental question set that defines food insecurity for families in the US. There are two dimensions of that, the diet quality and the diet quantity. So food insecurity is defined with low insecurity with the quality and very low in related to quantity. Nationally, you can see some of the statistics from that indicate 12 to 13% of families experience low and very low food insecurity. And now we have college campuses. Now, college campuses, you can look at that range is vast, the spectrum of food insecurity, 20 to 66%, utilizing predominantly the 6-item question set, the supplemental question set for food insecurity from the USDA. In UC campuses within the University of California, where I'm from, we're looking at our undergraduate to graduate rates. And what's important to think about this is that spectrum difference and what is happening in college campuses. Just less than 10 years ago, there were less than 10,000 students in peer-reviewed journal publications around college food insecurity in the US. And it's growing and expanding with new research and engagement on this, not only on the figures, but to get down to the equity and questions around who is impacted. And just from a few years ago, and you'll hear more from Dr. Jeannie Kim on our latest resources in the UC in research, we're looking at different dimensionalities of the experience of food insecurity and who is more disproportionately impacted. And with that, you can better understand 1 to 3 factor analysis so that we know our foster youth are more impacted than our standing averages in the UC, our first generation and low income, our independent students. And when you add those factors, if you're foster youth and independent and underrepresented minority, you're up to 74%. And so we begin to understand who is impacted in the food system and college food services. And then we need to take a step back and raise the question of, well, how is this becoming an issue for students? And we know that the cost of attendance are a significant factor for that. That's everything outside of tuition. And just during the last decades, we understand our high income and wealth holders in the US have been less taxed than from the 1940s. We have insufficient wage, job access, and social services in the US scene with rising income inequality and rising costs of living, and insufficient state and federal investment in higher education. So in this context, students are coming in and trying to succeed. And we need to understand that there's a framework of challenge broadly, and that the universities, public and private, are doing incredible efforts in building on it to try to change what that looks like for the student experience. So we're going to start today and hear from Dr. Jeannie Kim. And I'll stop my share on her work in the University of California. And we'll move in to hear from Emily Cass with Swipe Out Hunger and go from there. So thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Tim, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me as a panelist for University Food Insecurity. As Tim mentioned, my name is Dr. Jeannie Kim, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the current Director of Student Mental Health and Wellbeing for the UC Office of the President within the Graduate, Undergraduate, and Equity Affairs Office. And so I will be speaking to you all about our perspective from UCOP in terms of university food insecurity through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think is one of our amazing pride points of how we've baked in diversity, equity, and inclusion into our food security efforts over the years. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go a little bit into our UC approach, and especially with me, I've only been in the role for about 6 months, but I've been doing this work over the past 10 years and working really closely with grassroots advocate organizations, nonprofit agencies, community-based organizations, state government relations, and thinking about this holistic picture of what providing food insecurity, and housing insecurity efforts look like within these constructs and these challenging intersegmental type challenges that we're seeing across higher education for our students. And so our approach is looking at student mental health and well-being, which includes holistic services, supports, resources that are necessary for our students to thrive and be well academically, professionally, and interpersonally. I absolutely see that our students and every single student who comes to one of our campuses has the ability to persist and thrive if they have a set of an ecosystem that can support that mission and that vision for their ability to achieve their academic endeavors and career goals, right? And what's really rooted in that is thinking about, the social determinants of health that really impact how our students experience the world around them based on their access to health services, based on the environment in which they've grown up, and how that's impacted, racial disparities and how our students come with their own experiences and stories to our campuses. But how do we acknowledge and recognize some of the traumas or the systemic racism that our students have experienced and ensure that when they arrive onto our campus, they have equity and access to those services and resources in order for them to thrive and be well, right? And then we move into what are the innovative approaches that we're contributing to as a university to help support and ensure that our students have access to those services and resources, and not feel shamed or stigmatized in accessing, support when they need it the most. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go into this expanded definition of basic needs that the University of California has established. Our regions have been incredibly supportive of the work that we have been doing over the past, 10 years, 6 to 10 years. And it really has been this incredible movement that we have experienced as a village, a grassroots effort that includes student advocates, staff advocates, faculty advocates, and now, a lot of support and buy-in from our state leaders as well as our university leaders to ensure that we're providing these services and resources. So the University of California defines student basic needs as an ecosystem of financial stability, healthy and sufficient food, safe, secure, and adequate housing, access to healthcare to promote mental health and physical well-being, and access to affordable transportation, emergency needs for dependents and parenting students, as well as, ensuring that our most marginalized students have access to these services and resources. So it's with this inclusive lens that we think about these comprehensive needs that represents the minimum necessary support that our students need to experience these holistic, opportunities within the University of California. So you'll see that there's the student responsibility in this graphic, the university responsibility, and then basic needs is really part of that infrastructure to ensure that our students have access to the needs that they, absolutely are required to have in order to be successful academically. Next slide, please. And so when we think about the actual student experience, what I love about the University of California is our partnership and thinking about data-informed decisions and the research that goes behind all of the work that we're doing. And our institutional research partners have really helped ensure that we're addressing student basic needs by including questions within our undergraduate experience survey, as well as our graduate well-being survey. So what you're seeing on this slide are results from our 2018-2020 undergraduate experience survey, as well as our 2016 graduate student experience survey. And what we found is in 2020, 51% of our undergraduate students reported low to moderate food security. And so you'll see that it's broken up between low and very low food security. And these questions were designed with our partner researcher and lead, Susana Martinez. And I want to make sure that I give that shout out and that credit to our partners and our researchers that are really helping to lead this effort and really understand the complexities that relate to food insecurity on our campuses. And then in 2016, 25% of our graduate students reported food insecurity. And we're excited to see the launch of our graduate wellbeing survey again in spring 2021 to see what these outcomes will look like and to be able to see if there's been any change in our impacts of our interventions and support services that we've provided within the UC system. So as you look at this data, and as Tim had mentioned in the opening slide, you see these demographics and the students who are experiencing it, but we're seeing it across the board for all demographics of our students. But I think one of the important things to look at is if you go to our UC System Info Center, you can actually filter these tables by different demographics. You're in school. I think there's also a filter for student disability and mental health. So there's a whole host of ways that we can look at this data and really digest and start to pull apart, one of the reasons why and how we can best support these students on our campuses. Next slide, please. And so the research really shows that students from marginalized backgrounds experience higher rates of food insecurity, including students of color, low-income students, first-generation college students, our LGBTQ+ students, and students who are formerly in the foster care system. And these impacts and our students' experiences have grave impacts related to their physical health, their psychosocial well-being, their academic performance, and retention and student success. And so what does that actually look like in practice on our campuses? We've definitely seen cases where students will come into the health center, with a complaint of having, stomach issues, but those stomach issues may be rooted into stressors that are related to being food or housing insecure. And we've definitely built these robust infrastructures to help support connection to services and supports. So what I think is beautiful about the system that we've built within the University of California are these intentional collaborations to understand that, you know, somebody's physical health can also impact their mental health, as well as, you know, the status of their experience that they're having as a student who may be financially struggling, right? And these beautiful partnerships and collaborations that we've had with financial aid to move towards upstream approaches to double the Pell, which is one of our efforts that the UC system is working towards. And so as we think about the complexities of what our students are coming to the UC with, and the struggles and the challenges, we know that there are longer term health impacts that our students may experience, particularly with food and housing insecurity. Next slide, please. And so the work that we've been doing over the past 6 to 10 years has really been rooted in a lot of amazing opportunities, starting with the Global Food Initiative and engaging our campuses and our students and learning about what our student experience actually is, and really elevating those challenges that our students have experienced to being able to proactively look into the research to have a deeper understanding of what our students are experiencing, to looking at preventative strategies and developing programs and initiatives that really impact our students, to the advocacy at our local, state, and regional and national efforts. We're the first university within California to receive ongoing state funds to help support our students with basic needs. And we're really proud of that fact because we know that the research and actually what's happening with the student experience is true, right? And then we look at towards sustainability. What are the opportunities that we have to really build in basic needs as a baseline infrastructure for all students to have access to healthy, nutritious food? Thinking about how do we mobilize and indirectly and directly impact our students' basic needs through prevention, early intervention, outreach, through our food pantries, through our CalFresh outreach programs, and thinking a little bit more closely at what the research is saying and how do we build that into practice and how do we inform the research from our practices and of what we've been learning. Next slide, please. And so I want to close with a quote from one of our students who have experienced utilizing our services, from Ronald. During the first month into the coronavirus, I was really stuck in a situation that was almost impossible to bear. The basic needs program really came through for me at a time when they were needed the most. And this is a student who was rapidly rehoused with supports from our UC Berkeley team. And I think one of the things that's so important that we're contributing to this conversation is how do we ensure that we're baking in diversity, equity, and inclusion into the work that we're doing and ensure that our students have access and equity and access to those services and resources in order for them to be successful and thrive. So I'll pass it over back to Tim.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, and really appreciate you coming on board and committing your energy to the University of California and organizing this intersectional and intersegmental representation in California with our work in the UC. And noting the Berkeley reference is a nice segue into our next speaker, Emily, who is an alumni of UC Berkeley and got her knock baking bread for Challah for Hunger and connecting on issues of food security as a student leader. She's currently the community engagement manager at Swipe Out Hunger, where she convenes and supports Swipe Out Hunger's dedicated national network of college students, administrators, and campus affiliates in food security programming on their respective campuses. She graduated with a BA in sociology from the University of California, Berkeley, where her interest in food justice began with her role on Challah for Hunger's executive board, co-coordinating the 2015 UC Berkeley Food Access and Food Security Summit. So she's been part of our Village of Basic Needs in the journey, and I'd like to pass it on to you, Emily. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Tim. And thank you for having me today. It's really wonderful to be here. And so would you like to? Yes, okay, sorry, I had a notification pop up. So yes, very happy to be here today, and very happy to be here amongst so many incredible professionals that are working in this field. I am a proud UC Berkeley graduate and a proud Holla for Hunger alumni, and very happy to represent those communities. I know some Holla for Hunger representatives are on the call today. It's great to see you all. And I work as the community engagement manager at Swipe Out Hunger. And as I go through the presentation, I'll tell you more about who we are and what we do. Next slide, please. So we know from data from around the country on a national scale that 1 in 3 students regularly skip meals. And food insecurity is defined as essentially, and it really depends on the person, but essentially not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, and it takes different forms. So it isn't even necessarily that one person is going to not know where their next meal is going to come from, but maybe their check bounces at work. And they don't necessarily have the opportunity to buy more meals, and they don't know where they're going to get their meals for the next week. Or, you know, they don't have the time during finals to have the extra hours of work, so they don't know how they're going to earn the money to help feed themselves or feed their family. For some students, it's one meal. For some students, it's a consistent lack of nutritious and nourishing meals. So we here at Swipe Out Hunger recognized the need for this about a decade ago, which we know is not the first time food insecurity popped up. But we started as a student-led organization at UCLA here in Southern California, based in Los Angeles. And from there, it has grown. Next slide, please. So now we work with over 130 university partners around the country in 40 states. And within all of those university partners are student leaders that are leading these initiatives on their campuses, whether it's starting meal swipe donation programs, working on SNAP outreach and enrollment, working on food pantry development and expansion, working on other food resources in the community. Over 400 students around the country we work with regularly to further develop these programs and ensure that all students on their campuses know about them and can access them in a comfortable and as destigmatized a way as possible. So we've served upwards of 2 million meals, or rather our campus partners have served upwards of 2 million nourishing meals, which we have supported and empowered students and other campus leaders in distributing to their students. Next slide, please. So how do we work to eliminate college student hunger? It has, as I mentioned, started at UCLA as a student-led organization when the students recognized that there were extra meal swipes and meal points and dining dollars left over in their meal accounts that were essentially, disappearing into thin air. And what if those swipes could go to those who needed them, who couldn't necessarily afford the, high-priced meal plans on campuses, or maybe they weren't living on campus and weren't required to have meal plans and needed to find ways to get food while they were still on campus but couldn't afford the prices for campus on food. Wide variety of reasons. That said, we started with the meal swipe donation program, and that was the first large portion of the campuses that we work with started with meal swipe donation programs. As we went along, we realized that the meal swipe donation program was not a one-size-fits-all solution. Some campuses had meal programs, some had, were commuter schools that didn't even have dining halls but had restaurants on campuses. Some were, had limited dining hall that were only open during certain hours of the day, and students didn't necessarily have the opportunity to access those meals when they needed them. So as we went along, the meal swipe donation program still is our flagship program, but we realized that we needed to do more. So the innovative anti-hunger solutions include, as I mentioned before, the food pantries. They include SNAP outreach and enrollment. They include text alert systems to alert students of free food on campuses that are left over from catered events, as well as farmers markets on some campuses, and a ton of other really innovative solutions that we've either supported students in the development or have worked in brainstorming with the campuses and creating the solutions. So in terms of advocacy and policy, we authored the Hunger Free Campus Act in 2017, which Jeannie was mentioning state funding for the UC campuses. we actually, the Hunger-Free Campus legislation allowed schools to receive state funding to fund these basic needs programs. And we here at Swipe Out Hunger authored that legislation. It has since been passed in a number of states and has been introduced in a number of states. So we're hoping that this can become a more frequently used tactic for receiving funding. And we have a whole now arm of our work dedicated to advocacy and policy. And student empowerment is certainly a huge piece of that, as we know that students are the ones that are going to solve student hunger because they are the ones that are on the ground with their peers knowing what's going on, and are the ones that can inform what the best case scenarios are for these, for feeding students. The next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, the swipe drive in noting time, I'll just go through it briefly, but essentially students donate extra meal swipes, those go into a swipe fund, and then those are used either in a one-to-one transfer so students can use the swipes in the dining halls, or they're donated so that the campus food pantry can be stocked. Next swipe, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide, please. So joining the Swipe Out Hunger network, it takes many different forms. It can be creating a meal swipe donation program. It can be, having an existing food pantry and wanting our continuous support with it. But essentially, campuses will receive their own customized web page, and Swipe will provide ongoing support like evaluation services, which we offer to our campus partners that have meal swipe donation programs, education on the issue, marketing help, so sending materials with our brand kit and other sort of coaching and consulting services for marketing the program to ensure it's as destigmatized as possible, and to ensure the word gets out as far and wide as possible. So we also are working with schools in continually learning more about the programs that they have and seeing ways that we can help them scale the programs and also get the word out to other campuses so that we're not all working in a silo here. We're all working together on this issue. We might as well share ideas and support students everywhere with those ideas. Next slide, please. So that leads me to our National Student Navigator Network. We over the summer, last summer, partnered with RISE, which is also a nonprofit organization that is working towards advocating for free college for students. So we launched a one-on-one referral service where students are paid a living wage and trained to help peers access financial resources and other supportive services in their areas. And at a time last summer when relying on the infrastructure on campuses was somewhat more difficult and challenging, having the opportunity for peers to connect with one another, similar to the mutual aid networks that popped up all around the country, obviously around the world, but from what we saw all around the country during this time, students having the opportunity to connect with one another was very important, and providing support to their peers and hosting webinars, and seeing that their peers wanted to help them was a really integral part of providing support to students around the country. Next slide, please. So students can request support through a form, and a navigator will reach out. With the Student Navigator Network, as of December 2020, over 7,300 students had been served across every state, and that was with the National Student Navigator Network. Next slide, please. So with this, with the data that we received from this program, 50% of students felt more knowledgeable about the resources that were available to them. They received useful information from their navigator, over 3/4 of students, and they would recommend the service to a friend, a very high percentage. So these are testimonials from students who access the resources in the program, helping students who are parents. We have a larger diversity of students now, more so than ever, who are attending college. And we always say that students are ready to go to college, but our college is ready for students. And that's what we're hoping to achieve here, is helping colleges get ready for students and helping students help their peers in this, in accessing basic needs resources. Next slide, please. With SNAP, over $628,000 in benefits were received, or excuse me, were secured for students, unemployment insurance, as well as campus financial aid. Thousands of dollars were secured for students. Next slide, please. Then with that, we realized that one, more funding was needed for this program, so we could not financially continue with the program, but the CUNY Student Navigator Food Program Student Food Navigator Program was then born, and it's centralized within the CUNY system of New York. Next slide, please. There are supposed to be 2 videos there. I'm not sure what happened. There we go. There we go. Okay. Well, and in the interest of time, not going to watch, but we have awesome videos of our CUNY Student Food Navigators. And these are 2, Suha and Crystal, that have done really incredible, really groundbreaking work in a lot of ways in providing access to their peers. Next slide, please. So this is just talking about the incredible success that the peer-to-peer support model has provided. And these slides will be sent out or be available after the presentation. Next slide, please. So noting the importance of this program, CUNY students who, especially those who are earning less than $20,000 of income per year, were some of the target audience for students to access this program. And 48% of CUNY respondents to a survey reported that, of which was roughly 132,000 CUNY students, they faced food insecurity in the prior 30 days. Next slide, please. And this is talking more about the expansion of the program. Apologies for these wordy slides. I didn't realize how long this would take. Please go to the next slide. So students can text food to that number, and then they will be connected with a student navigator that will be able to help them access food pantries in their area. Let's say they're a student at Baruch College and they are living near Brooklyn College. The student navigator will have their zip code and be able to tell them which food pantries are available in the areas that are closest to them and the like. Next slide, please. More information on the program. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip through this. Next slide, please. And more information. It's received national press both through Civil Eats and Hunter College, New York City Food Policy Center. Next slide, please. Just speaking a little bit more to our student advocacy. Next slide, please. So we work with a student cohort that works on advancing policy for food, including the Hunger Free Campus Act. And so we're working to expand student involvement and have worked with students around the country and speaking with our representatives. Next slide, please. So this is just some examples of our anti-hunger legislation tracker and helping students get involved in advocacy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And that's all. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Apologies if I went a minute over there. But yes, more information will be available after if you'd like to actually read those slides that were in the presentation.
That's rich, Emily.
Thank you.
Hey. Appreciate that. And just your evidence of how collaboration and connection across programs, whether it's driving resources from campus meal programs to galvanizing SNAP and CalFresh in the state of California, how we all play a part, whether we're institutions, agencies, or nonprofits, and building a community of support for students. And speaking of students, just to lead the way into our student presenter, Shireen El-Rafai, who's a food insecurity advocate and recent graduate from the University of California, Santa Barbara. She obtained a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, a minor in Chinese, and completed the Technology Management Certificate Program. And she's a student coordinator of the UC Santa Barbara Associated Student Food Bank. And as a student coordinator, she oversees the Seed Bank and is the co-chair of the UC-wide Pantry Pod meetings and a member of the Basic Needs Task Force, an organizer of various food and seed bank workshops. She's dedicated to ensuring students are aware of the services available and have access to the resources they need to excel at UCSB. And not only does she advocate for student resources at the collegiate level, but also nationally with the Basic Needs Lobby Trip last winter to increase funding and accessibility across the nation to basic needs resources. Shireen hopes to continue to advocate and pursue nonprofit work to address food insecurity post-graduation. Thank you, Shireen. Grateful for you to be here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Tim. So going into it, so I'm just going to give you a bit about my perspective as a student and also as a student coordinator at the University of Santa Barbara, California. Santa Barbara. Next slide, please. So again, my name is Shireen. I'm a student coordinator at the Associated Students Food Bank. And next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about food insecurity. So there's a lot of stigma associated with it. And what I've noticed at UCSB is kind of as follows. So next slide, please. So at UCSB, some students believe the food bank is only for food insecure students, that they'll be taking food away from others, that CalFresh is only for those who are struggling financially or food insecure. But in reality, none of these statements are true. And I definitely was one of these students. As a freshman, I think I had 10 meals a week on my meal plan, and I was unwilling to purchase more because I couldn't afford it. And I didn't really want to reach out for help. I wouldn't purchase food outside of the dining commons. I would try and eat as much as I could, but 10 meals is just not enough when you're supposed to eat 3 a day. So it definitely wasn't healthy. And I definitely was in denial about it. I didn't want to admit that I was food insecure, that I needed help. And I've definitely noticed that with a lot of students. And it wasn't until my sophomore year when someone started to notice what I was going through and they introduced me to the food bank and CalFresh and all of these amazing resources that I really realized that there really is no stigma associated with it. Like it's a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness to ask for help. And that's something that I really needed to know and hear as a student. And I was so happy I did. And I actually heard about it from Megan Akita, a previous student coordinator at the food bank. And she really changed my perspective. And that's when I applied to be a student assistant at the food bank. And now this is what I do. Next slide, please. So here are some student testimonials about how the food bank has helped them. This student said, "My mom lost her job and my dad retired earlier this year, so I lost a lot of my financial support suddenly. There were some weeks when I needed to decide between toiletries and food. The AS Food Bank helped me through the worst times with dignity and respect, and I'll always be grateful." And I really resonate with this student testimonial as that's definitely how I felt. I felt like I had to pick between food and other resources. And I don't know, coming to the food bank really changed that for me because it wasn't a space where you were just there to get food, it was a community. You spent time there, you had snacks, you watched TV, you did your homework, you talked with the other student assistants. No one judged you. Sure, there were limits, but of course, we're always willing to give students more, and I really understand that now. And here's another student testimonial that kind of demonstrates that. Next slide, please. So food bank, come for the necessity of food, stay and hang out for the community. And this is really the community and the kind of environment that we do our best to cultivate at the food bank because it really isn't something to be embarrassed about and we want students to know that. And I think we've really created a community at UCSB where it's cool to have CalFresh, it's cool to go to the food bank, it's cool to start your own garden and grab seeds. And here's a little bit more about our impact. So next slide, please. So the AS Food Bank last fall was seeing almost 1,000 students a day, which was just incredible. At this time, we were open 5 days a week from 9 a.m. to 6, and it was crazy. We had a line out the door. There were like 100 students in the morning at 9 a.m. to get food. Like it was amazing. And now we have so many other programs. We have a seed bank where students can get seeds, pot, and soil to start their own garden. We have workshops to teach students how to grow their own plants at home. We partner on the Kosher and Halal program. We have other basic needs workshops on how to cook food at home, how to be sustainable, and we're really just trying to create this environment where students feel empowered to take advantage of their own food security and really just not be afraid to ask for help and make a difference in their lives. So next slide, please. And so what does food security mean to me? Next slide, please. So it means students don't let students go hungry. And this really resonates with me because as a student, it really has become my passion to make sure all students are aware of the resources that we have and really making sure that no student is left feeling disempowered. And so I think this was from 2019 or 2018. We distributed about 100,000 pounds of food. We service 3,000 students, and that's about 13% of the UCSB population. And those numbers have increased since then. And this is an insane increase from when the food bank first started in 2011. And people are also donating. We get a lot of donations from students, faculty, the community, which is just really incredible. And then next slide, please. So a little bit about what we're doing on the UC-wide level. I co-chaired the UC-wide food pantry pod with Brooks, and this year we've done a lot. We've developed COVID-19 protocols for various scenarios. We have workshops every month to kind of work through different issues that our campuses are facing. We've developed standardized data measurements so we can kind of see across all campuses what we're doing, how much food we're taking in, how much food is donated, how much food we have to give away, which is really amazing to kind of see and quantify the work that we're doing. And then hopefully by the end of the spring of 2021, we will have completed our UC campus-wide toolkit, which will kind of show our best practices across all UC campuses and really show the hard work that we're putting in, because I see it, we all see it, but I want to make sure everyone is aware of it. And yeah, next slide, please. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shireen, for sharing your energy and wisdom. And this speaks to so many questions that we'll have time to after Dr. Parr's presentation regarding peer engagement and destigmatizing efforts and what you're seeing on the ground and what you're feeling should be lifted. And with that, moving from the practice and service and research and analysis in student affairs professions, we're transitioning into education as a transformative measure for student agency and experience. And I'd like to introduce Damian Parr, who works for the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, who did his doctorate at UC Davis, really exploring the social movements of student gardens and spaces and their intersectionality for larger social movements, and has helped kick off an agroecology food systems major at UC Davis and at UC Santa Cruz now, and deeply committed to the educational experience of students. And welcome, Damian. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thanks for all the presenters. And just a little bit, this talk is mainly looking at how we approach education. So looking at the curricular side of this equation, and how do we support the students who actually want to make this their academic career and their professional work going forward. Looking at the data that was shared at the very beginning of this workshop, how do we come up with that information? How do we collect that information? How do we present that information? All the great organizing work that's taken place by students and staff and faculty administration. How do we become skilled and knowledgeable professionals to make this work our professional careers? And so undergraduate education is central to that in terms of developing our competencies. And the university, as education as it's one of its primary missions, we develop curricula, we develop undergraduate degree programs specifically to serve the professional development and society. So we can have participants in our society that have this as their professional work, their goals, and contribute to society, correcting some of these problems. So Damian Parr, he, him, his, and just a little bit, my own personal history from ages 3 through 8, part of a working poor single mother in Los Angeles, working poor community of color, and background. And, so this stuff is, having experienced hunger myself, and at an early age, that trauma is very impactful. And it's interesting, Tim, you're hosting this again. And I remember I work in academia. I focus on degree programs. I'm focusing on how to support our institution, really get serious about how to educate ourselves and each other on these issues and how to be powerfully equipped to deal with them, take action on these. But it's not that common that I'll be asked about the question specifically around food security. And it brings up a lot of psycho-emotional instability, to be honest with you all. And some of you may relate to this when you've experienced trauma, especially as a child. It's hard to go back and forth from your past and into your future. But I bring that up partly to share that it is fundamentally what has motivated me. The on a basic level of securing my own food, I pursued agriculture and a means of production and access to avoid that type of pain and trauma from my own history. And I got introduced to agriculture and food systems work and became, of course, it's a very sensual, positive, inspirational line of work as well. So I have my own history in pursuing these studies, both at Santa Cruz and Davis, and so have made it my work to then contribute to shared kind of societal interventions. So how we can bring this to the fore and not have this whole conversation be kind of on the sidelines and relegated to kind of marginal importance and marginal populations and that sort of thing. So let me get into this quickly. And this is an example of within the curriculum. It was mentioned that I've worked on teams that have developed a sustainable agriculture and food systems undergraduate bachelor's of science at UC Davis. And then just this fall, we launched a major in agroecology here at UC Santa Cruz. And so there's fashioning the curriculum where the topics and issues will be relevant to issues of social justice, of equity, and diversity inclusion. And there's also, in addition to the topics and issues that are addressed in that kind of curriculum, there's how we go about teaching, the kind of pedagogical approaches to learning and development of our competencies. And then furthermore, there's issues of recruitment. In other words, making our programs accessible. And so we've gone into food access, but education access is its own issue. And also there's support throughout in terms of retention. So how do we specifically focus on these same issues around social justice, equity and inclusion, diversity, when we're talking about education and curriculum? And so this is a quick example of essentially a fellowship program. It's a USDA funded grant project that allows us to focus in on the students who would fit the same vulnerabilities and marginalizations that our food security issues are focusing on. So this is basically a diversity, equity, and inclusion framework for serving underrepresented students in agricultural and food systems studies. So I'll give you a quick example of how we are essentially working towards desegregating higher education and giving people support where they need it. Okay, go ahead. Next slide, please. So what would it look like for a more integrated, inclusive undergraduate experience of agroecology programming? And so we're looking at essentially the necessity to look across academic disciplines and to integrate in a transdisciplinary fashion where we link our research and our teaching and learning facilities together. And we look at all of the different diversity of drivers that have positioned us in this situation of having food insecurity, having biodiversity loss, these various forms of destruction of our basic support systems in terms of society, governance, and the environment. So we're looking at serving across demographic backgrounds, specifically in a desegregating framework around how our higher education supports people and the history of segregation and education in the US. So we are looking at, in particular, welcoming and inviting the diversity in a way that is not about assimilation into the contemporary social cultural dominant world, hetero white male, class privileged cultural identities in academia. We're specifically looking at supporting students bringing their agency, their vision, their voice and life experience and backgrounds to shape the way that academia shows up for them and serves the communities at large. Next slide. So we have specifically focused on increasing experiential activities to prepare students to join the workforce, promoting sustainable agriculture in the US. So we're talking about the curricular activities going beyond what is a typical kind of didactic book learning lectures, this abstract conceptual knowledge, to problem-based, place-based, social engagement activities. We've already spoke about what we're seeing is what we're focusing on in terms of desegregation, and specifically, again, addressing the legacy of segregation in public higher education. Next slide. So our objective is to broaden the student experience with research and mentoring programming, and to link ENVS, environmental studies, in this case, agroecology faculty and students with these faculties' lab and research activities. And we're looking at advancing the understanding of the interdisciplinary solutions to promote sustainable agriculture, ecosystem services, food justice at the agricultural natural interface. Next slide. These are just some examples of our research fields and our instructional activities. Here at UC Santa Cruz Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, but there are similar facilities at other UCs as well, and as well as nationally efforts to increase an integrative approach at this type of education. Next slide. So in this particular project, we recruited and trained 15 student fellows. It's very much a retention program. The majority were underrepresented students, as you can see, populations there. And they developed research projects related to sustainable agriculture, water conservation, biodiversity, plant diseases, and food security and justice, with one of 7 faculty in our particular department. We have field trips, workshops relevant to research ethics, data analysis and presentations, poster making and project evaluation, and students generate important and useful data and essentially advancing their professional development. Next slide. So to measure the acquisition, we used an NSF REU template that for assessing specific skills in terms of research, relative attitudes and behaviors, and the needed affective dimensions in terms of people's sense of confidence and comfort working in the field, as well as their sense of belonging in general. Next slide. These are some other field activities, measuring irrigation, pest management, etc. Next slide. So there's some focus group activity where we took in feedback. As you can see, the students reporting in. It's an amazing program. I feel that it has helped me grow tremendously. I feel so much less alienated from the university and higher education in general. We're seeing really good impacts from the programming in terms of the students' sense of belonging and their sense of relevancy about the topics and issues that we focus on and the way in which learning takes place. Next slide. They specifically talked about being introduced and having a sense of belonging within, as we're specifically addressing the issue around belonging and the campus having a predominant culture that is not relevant, if not antagonizing. And how do we address those issues specifically and proactively so that students do feel that this is a space for their own agency to express themselves and to make the university reflect their needs and interests, as well as pursuing careers and graduate school. Next slide. So I'm going to skip over some of these assessment. Next slide. Some of the settings where we're working. Next slide. And next slide. So just takeaway, experiential learning program activities can be adapted to existing faculty student lab work study models, some coordination with department for inter and transdisciplinary workshop and field trips. Housing and stipends are critically important for students struggling financially, especially true for this demographic that we're working with. And so this has been brought up already in this workshop. Naming the legacy impacts of white supremacy, class marginalization, and patriarchy establishes relevancy and trust, and it's a critical first step in advocacy and ally efforts. Next slide. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. So we'll open it up for some of the questions that our participants had lifted. So I'll put the two questions out for our panel, and thank you all for your presentations. There was one question regarding food recovery and food waste, and what are some best practices insights around transitioning food recovery into our food support systems in the university context? And this was an example from UCI as a student working there, seeing food waste and curious around it. And then another question around fostering community at commuter and two-year campuses. So, and especially during hybrid instruction, what does this depth of relationship building look like in the face of COVID and in the face of an ongoing learning setting where they are commuting and traveling? How does relationship take place, and any offerings on either the food waste recovery or community and relationship building in COVID and commuter campuses? And if someone wants to take a step first and offer any thoughts.
I can jump in briefly to talk a little bit about the food recovery. And I think maybe Shireen would also have some insights from UCSB's perspective. But I think they're in the sustainable cycle of ensuring that our food systems are ensuring that there's healthy access to healthy, nutritious food. Oftentimes there's, from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective, there's this dichotomy of, food insecure folks don't have the ability to access these healthy foods, or don't have the, you're often eating fast foods because they're cheaper or things of that nature. And so when we think about these inequities and inequalities and access to healthy, nutritious food, I think sustainable aspects of rescuing food and ensuring that, if it's gleaning from a farm and ensuring these healthy produce options are available in our food pantries, it's part of that sustainable cycle in ensuring that folks have access to healthy foods.
Thank you. Shireen, Emily, any thoughts on like campus kitchen projects or other projects focused on our food recovery that have played out in any of your campaigns and campus teams?
Yeah, I can touch on a little bit about at UCSB what we do. And a big part of our food recovery process is that any food that campus stores, like we have the Arbor or like our store in the University Center, all these different stores sell food as well that are prepackaged in our kitchen, the central kitchen. And so any food that isn't sold within the designated time frame gets donated to us, and then we can distribute to students. We also take donations from local vendors. We're definitely trying to create partnerships with the dining commons because they have a lot of food waste, but we haven't been able to create that relationship yet. Any campus restaurants and things, those are big relationships that we have. Essentially just making sure like any food that would go to waste on campus is then donated to us because we do have an ability to distribute. So I think that's a key part in food recovery.
And Emily, maybe with the Swipe Out Hunger program, two-year campuses, how are they involved, commuter campuses, in that vision and work? Any insights?
Yeah, very happy. And I just speaking also to the food recovery piece, we work with many campus organizations around the country that are affiliated with the Food Recovery Network. And we often find that the student organization Swipe Out Hunger, if they have a student organization on campus, they'll partner with the Food Recovery Network chapter on their campus to, one, ensure that food in dining halls is reallocated to, those who might need them, speaking of food recovery. If there are extra swipes that can be used by students who are facing food insecurity, then it's essentially combating food waste because the students will be accessing food that would otherwise have gone to waste. But in terms of the commuter students piece, I think it's really important to note that oftentimes when commuter students come to campus, as I was mentioning during my presentation, even if they want to go into the dining halls, like let's say they come to campus a few times a week, they're hanging out with their friends in between classes, they want to be able to go into the dining hall. Oftentimes the high price of the meal plans or the high price of the food is what inhibits that sort of community building part of going to campus. So what we'll often suggest when it comes to commuter campuses, especially if there aren't necessarily dining halls, but rather let's say, vendors on campus, will often say creating a partnership with the restaurants on campus to, let's say, create a roundup program so that the students can buy meals and then round up to the nearest dollar, and whatever is left over is donated into a bank, and then all of those funds are then donated to create vouchers for students to use at the restaurants on campus. So there's a lot of really cool innovative solutions that students and other organizations have come up with. So definitely encourage and happy to talk more about that if anyone who asked the question wants to know what other schools are doing.
I wish we had another half an hour to get deep on this. There are further questions about how do we get involved. I think there's students interested. What are their next steps? And I know with Emily's slides, there's links to Swipe Out Hunger. I shared the food recovery link in the chat. You know, Jeannie, you know, in the UC, are we beyond the UC? You mentioned intersegmental. Are there like, how do students find out? And any offerings? And Damien on the educational side too. You're welcome to offer any insights, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Yeah, so within our intersegmental work, we're really working closely with the community colleges as well as the California State University system with our California Higher Education Basic Needs Alliance group. And I think one of the opportunities there is to get involved with advocacy and learning more about the campus-based issues that we're trying to elevate to our state legislature, to really understand, state and federal legislature, to really understand where the challenges lie for our students. And then at the local campus level, obviously working really closely with your basic needs hub or center or food pantry. I think just volunteering or walking in and learning more about resources and being an advocate is an incredible way to get involved. So a myriad of different ways that folks can participate at your own bandwidth level and time.
Yeah, and I'll echo that, saying getting involved with advocacy is a really powerful and impactful way to affect change. We have a student-focused cohort here at Swipe Out Hunger if you're interested in getting involved, and we also have students that are, you know, setting up meetings with their representatives, including Senator Klobuchar in Minnesota and a lot of other representatives around the country that are working on this legislation. So if you're interested in that, let me know. And also if you'd like to work with us in terms of setting up food security initiatives or other resources on campus, happy to chat further about that as well. Feel free to email me. I'll pop my email in the chat, and I'm sure you'll all receive the resource.
Thank you, Emily. And I know the other session was on the policy advocacy, so that's key to keep alive and having the student voices in it. Damien, do you want to speak to SAEA?
Yeah, just they're a group of us, largely when we were undergraduate, the graduate students and staff had organized a Sustainable Agriculture Education Association to advance and promote these sorts of academic programs that will focus specifically on food systems issues and agroecology. And so I just put in that link to the Sustainable Ag Education Association, and it has that particular one is a listing of programs at campuses nationally. So for students and for people who want to pursue this professionally as in their academic pursuits, this is a good resource for that. Thanks.
Great. So in closing, I want to just give a lot of appreciation to each of you for joining us and for our attendees to get fired up and sparked around college food insecurity, not as something that's invisibilizing and isolating, but galvanizing and connecting and nourishing, and that there's a community of practitioners, staff, faculty, students, nonprofit allies that were former students and organizers that are continuing to build exciting energy into this work. And we encourage you all to get involved, bring your voice and your energy to the table of this work. It's just growing, and we want to make it a beautiful banquet that nourishes all. So thank you again for joining us in this session. And as I noted in the chat, we have a 30-minute lunch break now. We encourage folks to preview the poster videos of all the student poster sessions. There's incredible posters in there, and that'll be kicking off at 12:30. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and take care.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.